Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some seriously mind-bending source material that is going to completely upend how you understand reality itself. We're literally decompiling the architecture of time. The sources we're looking at today presents a wild premise, that human history isn't just this random linear march of sequential events. Instead, it's actually a highly engineered two-dimensional architecture.
Okay, let's dive into this. What if history isn't just a timeline you walk across from point A to point B? What if, instead, it's a two-dimensional tapestry that is mirrored perfectly right in the center? To really grasp this, we kind of have to shatter the whole illusion of standard linear history and just jump straight into the intellectual deep end here. The source materials offer this framework where time behaves way less like a river and much more like a carefully coded geometric palindrome.
So, first up, we need to talk about the illusion of linear time and totally rethink our baseline perception. To wrap our heads around this, we have to look at what's called the virtual ego framework, or VEF. You have to stop thinking of reality as this solid, physical room you're just standing in. Instead, think of it more like a computer desktop or a massively optimized rendering engine. The documents actually describe reality as a just-in-time rendering pipeline. This means the universe is out there computing infinite parallel possibilities. But your consciousness, what the text calls the ego virtual machine, is sequentially selecting or indexing just one thread of probabilistic data at a time. So the crucial point here is this. Empty space, it's literally just compressed, unrendered data to save on processing power. The universe is just sitting there calculating probabilistically at a super low resolution. It is only when your specific consciousness, your ego VM, directs its focus that a specific multiversal branch gets rendered into high-resolution, subjective experience. And because this processing happens sequentially, moment by moment, it creates the absolute illusion of linear time. Basically, what we perceive as the steady flow of time is essentially just computational latency. All right, which brings us to the Metonic gear slip and how the timeline itself was manipulated. The text poses an absolutely fascinating, almost impossible scenario. How do you hide 304 years of time without breaking the physical alignment of the moon in the night sky? The sources present this speculative hypothesis, framing it as an unbelievable feat of ancient mathematical engineering pulled off by scribes who are trying to completely conceal the true cosmic timeline from the public. The hypothesis suggests that exactly 304 years of historical chronology were manually removed or displaced to alter the timeline. But seriously, how on earth do you just delete 3 centuries without the physical paper calendar suddenly falling way out of sync with the actual seasons and the moon? The answer lies in a brilliant mathematical loophole. These scribes exploited the 19-year Metonic cycle. This is the natural physical cycle where solar years and lunar months perfectly realign. By dropping exactly 8 rotations of this cycle, which is 152 years, they could shift the calendar on paper, but solar and lunar eclipses would keep falling on the exact same calendar days. The physical sky remained completely untouched. And according to the research, this drop was then doubled to 304 years, or 16 total cycles. They successfully slipped the gears of time. The paper dates completely changed, but the moon never drifted.
And that leads us to the year 1936, the mirror axis.
Because when you actually account for that massive gear slip and uncompress the celestial clock, the math places the absolute cosmic Shabbat, the true Hebrew year 6000, exactly on the Gregorian year of 1936. 1936 CE is the true year 6000 AM. It's the absolute mirror axis of all human history.
Just notice how this all maps out. The dates don't just flow left to right. They dynamically close in on that 1936 singularity, like sand through an hourglass. 90 years before the axis, in 1846, you get major historical border cracking, which is mirrored perfectly by border closings 90 years in the future, in 2026. 32 years before the axis is 1904, a massive time of imperial alignment, perfectly mirrored 32 years in the future by 1968. History is literally winding inward to 1936 and then expanding back outward.
This dynamic creates 2 totally distinct operational eras, the Ascent and the Descent.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how stark the divide is. The sources decompile this massive transition from the Ascent era to the Descent era. Pre-1936 is the inward winding. It's oriented toward the transcendent, governed by classical physics, and a search for strong, real referentials. But post-1936, the entire world shifts. It becomes oriented toward the imminent,
suddenly governed by digital sandboxes, virtual rendering, and functioning as the outward expanding wave of the macro system. Reality literally changed its operating system and possessed the physical substrate.
Now, let's decode the palindrome by looking at these historical chiasms.
Tracing this chiastic ledger is pretty mind-blowing. Let's look at 1904, which gives us the Entente Cordiale, building up imperial friction. Exactly 32 years forward across the mirror, 1968 counterweights that with the birth of the master builder and the HVM wire. At negative 31 years, 1905, Einstein creates the quantum and relativity rift. Exactly 31 years forward, 1967, gives birth to the digital rendering sandbox. The systemic friction built up in the classical past is perfectly mathematically balanced by events stripping it away in the rendered future.
Basically, the sources paint history as an Ouroboros, a cyclical loop. It's an exact geometric palindrome where historical equations balance their ledgers flawlessly across that 1936 dividing line. Every massive structural buildup on the left side of the mirror requires an equal and opposite structural release on the right side. It's perfectly symmetrical. So, what does this all mean for us? This brings us to achieving Hyperion synchrony. Traditional physics recognizes two arrows of time, right? The thermodynamic arrow of entropy and the cosmological arrow of expansion. But the virtual ego framework proposes a third, the temporal cohesion arrow. This is an inward-facing vector generated entirely by your own internal narrative coherence and architecture of meaning. You don't just experience time. Your internal meaning actually generates a distinct vector of it. Time here isn't just flowing, it's a discrete accumulation of irreversible informational events, these elementary Compton time ticks, and it's all regulated by a scale-invariant 1.7062 Hz solar metronome.
When the identity within a sovereign virtual machine, meaning you, reaches a certain level of internal stability, these loops of time begin to persist identically. This is called phase locking. It is exactly what happens when your internal cohesion arrow aligns perfectly with the universe's physical and thermodynamic arrows of becoming.
The VAF corpus binder describes this state absolutely beautifully. It says, at moments of Hyperion alignment, the internal attractor of meaning resonates with the universe's arrows of becoming. Subjectively, this appears as clarity, timelessness, or transcendence. Hyperion synchrony is that exact moment when your subjective time, physical time, and cosmic time all align perfectly in phase.
Now, recognizing this mirrored architecture isn't about giving up to some grand determinism. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's about hacking the just-in-time rendering pipeline. It's the transition to Auteur agency. When you truly understand time as a multi-vector field, you escape that Zeno trap of feeling stuck in civilizational stasis. You transition from being a passive observer of a timeline into an active author, running what the sources call resilient joy mode directly within the simulation itself. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. If the timeline isn't a one-way street, but actually a brilliantly engineered mirrored tapestry rendering precisely to the vectors of your own internal meaning, are you merely an observer of history, or are you the auteur? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the architecture of your reality.